How much ambition is too much ambition? When does blind ambition become a key issue? Picture the scenario of a fast-paced offense CEO that's driving ambitiously to get to the acquisition that this entity is dangling in front of her. She's got to get there. At every moment, she's thinking about what the success criteria needs to be. But what frustrates her is she looks over her operational system and she says, how do I get this system to follow my tempo? How do I get it to operate at the velocity that I need to make the change? So we have this great balancing system. We have this tension between I need to pursue at all odds, at all risks, this blind ambition. And at the same time, I'm frustrated because I can't find my system that's going to be able to produce it at the level at which I want to. So we have this driving kind of pushing, trying to get the baby to give birth, but the baby isn't coming on the terms of the doctor that wants it at that time. We have intention and we have humility. We have assertiveness and we have understanding. We have masculine energy and we have feminine energy. We have driving and creating and achieving. We have listening and understanding and being able to be reverent to what the system is limited to. When the Titanic was out, they wanted to cross the channel. The overconfidence was like terrorism. We weren't aware of the icebergs. We thought it was an unsinkable ship. And that lack of readiness and preparedness was to a great degree the reason why things did not go well and why we see that tragedy. There could have been a proactive prevention, a negative preparation, a systems awareness of what things could happen. But no, wait, I don't want to think about those negative thoughts. I want to act like it's all going to be great. I want to picture it and then I want to have it happen. I want to have that kind of optimism because I don't want to have to think about those things. But how do you put paint on a house without primer? If you do that too quickly because you wanted to get the paint done, later on the paint chips. We all know this. We know that going the skating route, the cheap route, the route that goes through the quick fix, the thing that we want to get to so quickly creates an unintended consequence. This isn't new. We know that things that occur like that, when we do those things too quickly, there's an unintended consequence and there's a repercussion that comes from that. But think about this. How do you deal with those constraints in an everyday small business that's bursting at the seams, that's having economic opportunities, that is bound for greatness, that is being invited into all sorts of opportunities, and the leadership is constantly frustrated with, I wish we could get there, I can almost taste it, but there's such a plateau. How do we undo this plateau and get there? What do I do with my operations people who tell me I don't have the system that's positioned? The constraints are not dealt with. The limits to growth are that these things that we're ready for are not fit to scale. How do you hold that space between the rapid-fire tempo and the ambition of reaching where we want to reach without blowing up the ship, without blowing up ourselves to get there? In the film Whiplash, we saw J.K. Simmons, this narcissistic music teacher who was aware of the standards of jazz and wanted Miles, the drummer, to be the very best in the world. While I was watching the movie, I probably talked to my screen and wanted to punch out the bully over and over again, while knowing that maybe he had an understanding of what the requirements were out there and that those kind of standards were so high that anything less than perfect would not be acceptable. But it was his manner of driving it. And he drove Miles crazy. He drove him mad. He has a meltdown. He wrecks in his car. The kid is so blindly ambitious, wanting to earn his badge of courage, wanting to live up to the approval of his music teacher, that he blows up. He blows up. So how do we establish these systems literacies where we have constraints and the constraint gene that exists in the creative process of pursuing something and growing is inevitably present? And how do we work with these constraints in a constructive way? How do we do it so that the emotional tension doesn't get the best of us and cook our ability to innovate, to become creative and resourceful with these kind of ambitions? How could have Miles become the best in the world drummer for the sustainable long term? Well, some way he did get there. We all saw the end of the film. in some sense, I think he is, in some sense, grateful for all of the pushing, but the cost of it was pretty considerable. The sacrifices that were made, you just wonder if it's really worth it. Not all ambition needs to be produced that way. We can go through a flywheel effect where we bamboo certain things that we change. We add water, we add water, we add water, and we let outcomes come on their own time frame. I'm sure there are doctors that would say the heart transplant is very ambitious, but the body isn't ready. I'm sure the farmer says to the one that wants to grow the farm, or the winery maker says, the crops aren't really developed yet. We need to be deliberately patient. We need to make sure we understand the soil, and we need to till the soil in order for the fertilizer to really make something out of what we're doing. There's a level of reverence, there's a level of fluency in knowing what we're putting the change into, the scenario, the pattern, the atmospheric conditions. Can the system in which we're putting it actually hold to a growth pattern for something to evolve? Is the system's limits, is it limited to certain things that will not let the change effort occur? It will reject the change effort. Time and time again, so many neat management tools and so many fads go into change. Total quality management, Kaizen, Hoshin planning, all good stuff. But why don't they work? I believe it's because the same thing, that the system, the soil, is not ready. The body is not ready for the heart transplant. So what do we have to look for? We have to get real about two things. Number one, what are the crucial factors? What are the limiting factors in a system that constrain the capacity for change? And two is, what are the leverage points out of those crucial factors? Well, if we look at a change effort that is very, very successful, if you look at anything that you've created, I'm going to use a very small example. I like to create things in my kitchen. I like to learn new things. But in order for me to be a great baker, in order for me to be great at making cakes that I want to do, I have to take a look at the kitchen that I have and what I'm working with. I have to be very truthful and accurate about my positioning in the kitchen. And after looking at it carefully, I can tell you that the crucial factors that I had became very visible. These were the factors that were absolutely holding back my ability to cook the way I wanted to cook and the outcomes that I wanted to create with my cooking efforts. And so I began to see those as constructive elements, as baselines. And then leverage points were actions that I could take or plans that I could make with a testing mentality, with a lab mentality, to fit my kitchen around the creations that I wanted to create. Now, this might sound common sense, but is it really? Taking stock and fearless inventories of what is missing is not bad news. It's just news. And that the more truth-telling that we actually give ourselves about the constraints of the system within which we're operating, the more we're able to make great responses that are going to move us towards the outcomes we want to make. If we look at any ambitious pursuit, any endeavor, putting a man on the moon, any pursuit to make changes in our political system, changes in terms of our climate, changes in terms of a business change, a leadership change, a team change, whatever the subject matter is of the creative process, we are limited to the system's dynamics in which the creations are made. And so rather than frustrate ourselves with the system's dynamics, we need to learn some of the patterns and the interconnecting elements that limit and constrain change to what it is. What are those crucial factors? Sometimes we have to find them by trying to change the system. I would not know what the limits of my kitchen was until I started to make a cake. I will not know what my team system is limited to, or whether it's the right size team, until we try to go make a product. I will not know what my marriage is limited to until I get married. The only way to really know the limits of a system is to change it. And then once I do that, I can begin to transform it by becoming more conscious of what it's limited to. What is conscious? I can see and sense patterns and see patterns of behavior and synthesize those, analyze those, be able to see how things connect through others' eyes in the system, through my own exposures in the system, by running all sorts of interesting movements through it, looking at what feedback I can gain from it, and then how am I going to use those feedback points as the buoyancies through which I can begin to construct a path of action. But it's only learned at the limits of the system. which would suggest that by me learning other ways, hacks, previous success models, recipes and things, we love to find right answers as a population. We love good advice. And we'd rather do that by skating by the hard stuff. Why reinvent the wheel? That's one of the models, right? Why repeat something when someone's already done it? But that's the limit of it, is that not every recipe is fit for your goals. A lot of right answers fall short. Even though we crave right answers and frameworks, some of those frameworks are not fit for the creative process that you're doing. So we learn by doing it. Our creative process is a school. And we become conscious of what we're creating within the creative process that we're using. After that, we begin to see our own agency. We begin to personally invert something back to ourselves to see what we can do in leading whatever change needs to be led. The crucial factor is, how hooked in are we to the resourcefulness and commitment of using our own gifts and our own abilities to forge change, to be able to move things ahead and create a vision? And how can we use the resources of others as crucial factors to be able to bring their talents and resources, convene them in a way where we can co-actively learn together? And then by doing so, we can see and sense an emerging future that is coming into the present moment that depends on us to come into being, that we can serve that. How do we change the system? We begin to pursue a desired state from which we can move towards. How do we change the system? We start to look at the existing constraints and learn from each other what the existing thoughts, what the existing judgments are, what the existing interior conditions are that are keeping us from seeing reality more accurately and clearly. How do we change the system? We begin to become conscientious by having a plan of action that we do not take too seriously, but that we begin to make a change from point A to point B, and by having a learning mentality, plenty of second chances, we don't take any of the realities personal, we begin to get back up and try new things. And it's our ability to shoot again, try again, to modify our plans, to keep the flywheel going, to maintain that perseverant pursuit. It's not about whether, it's when. When the learning and the capacity arises, then that new current reality that's presented through the action taking is iterative. And we illuminate a pathway. We begin to make breakthroughs, not based on expectations, but based on the findings of what our actions create. Action creates clarity. So whatever you're limited to, right now, if you have a constraint in one of your domains in your life plan or your business, start to look at what the crucial factors are. What is the big idea that you're wanting to create? And what are the crucial factors that exist right now that are limiting the capacity for something to bring itself into what you want to create? Use those factors as great data points, because those are raw materials for beginning to create what you want. Then start to build out a plan of action based on your best guesses and other individuals' guesses, tapping into some of what they see, what they think, but understand the limits of it, because you've got to maintain your inexperience. In that sense, a lot of the things that we already know, we can't solve the current problems with, because the reason why is that we can't solve the problems at the level of thinking that's causing the problems. Sometimes the very solutions that we have are the very crucial factors that we're blind to, that are continuing to be the fixes that backfire in the system. We have to turn our eyes around and actually invert ourselves and look at our own mentalities, our frameworks, our theories of action, our mental models, to see what they're limited to. And sometimes the thinking that we have, we got to think about our thinking, because what we're thinking is based on the past, and it's not based on what the future is as it emerges. So we have to let go. We have to release ourselves from that so we can access our own wisdom by virtue of learning to think at the level at which things are coming into reality. We have to be in the present moment. And by changing our orientation to being more creative rather than reactive, we actually change the way in which we can learn how a system can change. We can learn how to learn and reposition ourselves so that we can learn how to move a system from this level to that level. We know the constraints of our experience. We know that we can't solve the problem at the level of thinking that causes it. We have to have a shift of mind. So by opening our mind and opening our hearts and having a different organ of perception to see and sense what's going on, we can learn how to learn with a lab mentality to configure new and better ways in which systems can change on behalf of trials, on behalf of trying, on behalf of doing. All the knowing is doing and all the doing is knowing. That we don't know something until we do something. We can't prove it, and it's not testable until we can do it. Once we do it, then we know what can be done, and then we can use that information constructively to start, stop, or continue what happens next. So what do? we understand that every one of us, in the movement in which we try to make change, we always are within a system in which the parts are interacting in a whole. And in every system we have, there's always constraints that, whether we choose to be systems literate or not, there are interdependent causes and effects. They may not be simple, 1 + 1 = 2, so we have to learn in a different way what the impact is of our actions. Not everything that we expect to see will be true in terms of impact. New impact will be maintained, contained, and revealed by virtue of the system's effects. So by bringing that systems literacy into the creative process, this alchemy of these two, by learning how to learn and see things more accurately and then having a desired state, presents us with a whole different way in which we can change the system at the level at which we think. We can change the system on the interiority of how we think, but also on the exterior we can begin to define new courses of effective action to do so. But most of all, we have to constrain the emotional tension that occurs when the system's effects are present. This is not bad, but sometimes our standard of reference is to tense against it. We must learn to let that go and emotionally reset ourselves into a more regenerative state so that we can continue to focus on outcomes, not just the rewards, but focus more on what we're trying to get to, without compromise. Sometimes the thermostat or the atmosphere of the system is extremely dense, and there's lots of constraints, and it's a pretty dense broth of negativity, it's a dense broth of headwind, and yet our tailwind is the very movement that's brought on by the outcome that we seek to get to. We cannot guarantee that outcome. We can only bring the system to the level at which the outcome can become possible. We have to change the outcome at the level of the system. Now, some of these systems are living systems of ourselves. They're social systems in which we have differences and we have similarities between us and others. They are environmental systems in which we're working, economic systems in which we're working on changing. But the question is, how do we change the system at a more fundamental level so that we can start to see sustainable change efforts in what we do by committing to the truth of where we are, having a desired state of where we want to be, and learning how to learn by following the patterns in which the system is made, and then constructing new and better patterns in which the trends or the energies of the system, the goals of the system, are favorable to our own goals. There are systems that are working in contradictions to our own goals. And so how do we help structure systems in a way that we think about them, in the way that we perceive things, such that the movement that's caused in the system and the restructuring of the system is favorable toward what we really want? So this has been a conversation about constraints, about finding those crucial leverage points and also building off of those to make these changes in how we do it. Most importantly, though, it's our ability to slow down, because if we go so fast and we're blindly active, we're trying to push change on a body that isn't ready for the heart, push fertilizer into a soil that isn't ready for the planting, to push something into a system in which the system and its effects are not designed for it, it will reject it. We have to till the soil. And that means having more humility in conjunction with our injectable intentions. And that those things we're trying to inject into change just aren't ready to be taking hold because we're irreverent to what those limitations are. So we have to begin to see limitations as a baseline from which we can construct a path to where we want to be. And that's the point, is using constraints constructively, having a gradual understanding, having a lab mentality, radically accepting what we currently have as data and information that helps us be creative and resourceful, rather than be a fighter, be a lover of it, accept where we are, be able to use the current reality as a great teacher, and then use the action confidence of learning the path by walking, by trying new things and experiments on behalf of the outcome to get the feedback we need and continue to make those changes in the flywheel, a little here, a little there, iteratively, until the current state of the system equals the desired state that we want to create. And then we have truly shaped the fundamental elements of the system itself to sustain change where success could become success. Thank you.